But I was so happy that you were willing to talk to me because it was like, wow, this guy's really kind of figured something out here. And I was glad that you make some time to talk to me about it. You've sort of figured out how I got to your doorstep by this point. But yeah, I did. Probably the podcast episode that has gotten the most traction is one that I did around regenerative agriculture.
Oh, wow.
Actually, I did two, but the first one that was sort of an introduction to it opened my eyes, and I think has opened some eyes of others to this alternative path, and kind of the path that we're going down right now with sort of the industrial scale agriculture is not tenable, right? It just doesn't seem like, unless they do something very different in the next 10 years, it doesn't seem like it's really viable in the long term. So I've been playing off of the fact that that seemed to have some traction. And one of the paths that I've gone down is trying to understand what the potential is for local food. So I live in the Dallas area, and I've been reaching out to folks locally, an urban farm, somebody who's doing vertical farming, just kind of to get a lay of the land, to understand sort of what the potential is to really feed ourselves with people who are, growing and processing, maybe even manufacturing food within 50 to 100 miles. So that's kind of the backdrop for our conversation. When I read or saw what was on your website and listened to your conversation on how I built this, it really got me thinking, wow, here's somebody who's trying to do something sort of consumer by consumer, eater by eater. And, the notion of regenerative agriculture and biodiversity seems central to what you're doing. So I thought, let me see if you'll talk to me about that. And I thought I would just start by asking you to sort of tell me about your mission, tell me about your vision.
Sure. Well, the mission has always been to build small, sustainable communities.
Okay.
And we approach that from an architectural perspective. My background's in architecture.
Yes.
And the reason why we started lemonGRAFT was because we realized that we couldn't actually successfully build small sustainable communities without first addressing the software infrastructure or the coordination of that community. What we realized is that we could build all the technology as far as hardware is concerned. We could build all of that, but it would be the equivalent of you handing me, like putting me in a mechanic's garage and telling me to build a car. It's like, okay, Zach, you have all the tools you need. Now be sustainable, build a car, right? I'd be like, okay, wonderful. Like, I don't know what to do with this. I can't build you a car. And I feel like that's what I've realized is that that's what we're doing with communities. We're giving them all the infrastructure, all the hardware that they need to live sustainably. But there's no like cultural understanding. There's no connectivity. There's no the next question that occurs is like, what do I do with this? Because I've lived in this more modern world for so long that I'm not really sure how to use this more sustainable hardware. So we think of sustainable community as almost like a computer, like hardware and software. And
Okay.
lemonGRAFT, what we realize is that we don't have a whole lot of the software to support the hardware. And if you don't have that, then you don't have any of the connectivity needed to make this thing succeed. So we started lemonGRAFT, and we see that as really like the operating system for sustainable communities. And the starting point for us was food. That's why we're really focusing on food right now and creating a regenerative food system. Because we think that's the starting point and the base of all other categories of sustainability in regards to sustainable communities. So that's really our mission, I would say.
Okay. And so that's interesting. I didn't realize that you were thinking more broadly than food. So how might it progress from there? Like what other kinds of things are you thinking about?
Well, even just in food,
Okay.
there's already so much to handle.
Yes. Sure.
At the end of the day, we're trying not to think too far ahead because
Okay.
the more we broaden ourselves, the more it'll be diluted. So we're just trying to really just knock the ball out of the park, with regenerative food system. But I will say that the idea is that once people start consuming from a regenerative food system, or like, for example, when I start buying food from my community, I'm going to start asking different questions than I normally do, because I'm more connected to the food, and I'm more connected to the environment that it's grown in. And so from there, I think new questions will start to come up, which is, why doesn't my house recycle gray water? Why am I not allowed to capture rainwater and use it to water my garden, right? Because if I have a garden, why wouldn't I be allowed to do that? I'm wasting so much water. Why is my gray water mixed in with my black water and then just sent out and recycled that way? Why can't I recycle it on, So there's going to be a lot of questions that start to come up when people start to grow food, and that's the idea. I don't want to go too far into all of that, but I think just getting people to ask the right questions will lead us down the path of all these other branches of sustainable infrastructure for communities.
Yeah,
but the people, the public has to be aware first.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, actually, now that I think about it. So tell me, well, let me ask you this first. LemonGRAFT, where does that name come from? How did you concoct that name?
Yeah, well, so lemon has a kind of a definition beyond just the fruit. It's kind of considered like a dud, or
Sure.
like you have a lemon, like when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? And that's kind of the idea that we took, right? What we were realizing when we started getting more into this, just trying to find someone else who did this before we started lemonGRAFT. I realized that the small scale farmer, from like a large scale perspective, was kind of seen as a dud, or kind of useless. Like, that's fun, I'm glad you have your hobby, you're never going to feed the world like that, right? Like, that doesn't solve our problem.
Right.
And so from that perspective, I was told from many people, who oversee community development and big scale agriculture, and they're like, yeah, that's nice, but that's like a lemon. That's it's fun to play around with, but it's never going to solve our problems. But the more I thought about it, the more I said, well, maybe by themselves, because I realized a lot of people were seeking and pursuing this end, which is like, I need to grow my own food. I can't get the quality produce that I want from the grocery store. I just can't. So I need to grow it myself. And I was seeing pockets of this springing up all around. I mean, really all around the world, it's happening, but it's all disconnected. And so I thought about it, and I said, well, what happens if we graft all of these nodes together and we create a network, right? Like, when you quilt all these little scraps of fabric together, you end up with something extremely valuable, right? Like together, unified and coordinated, all these little lemons are going to make lemonade. Or so the idea is like LemonGRAFT is saying, let's graft everything onto this tree, and we'll get a new kind of tree, and that new thing will be very, very valuable. And so that's kind of my rebuttal to a lot of the early opposition I received from people saying, like, this would never work, this isn't a good idea. I said, well, I think together it could be a very powerful force in the world.
Cool. No, I get it. And actually, I remember doing something not too long ago that indicated that yellow was associated with hope. I mean, it's certainly a happy color. And I believe a lemon itself is a symbol of hope, at least in some places. So yeah, why not?
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I did not know
I'll
that.
dig that up and send you what I found. There's an interesting book I read about mood and color. And anyway, so that's great. I think that's a great launching pad. Tell me then what it is that lemonGRAFT is today, or how you envision it working today, or when you get it off the ground, actually.
Sure. Yeah, we're still a few months out from launching the product. I mean, we have a website now. You can go on, you can sign up, you can follow the progress, and we're building the community now, and the community is engaging with us and helping us to understand what their needs are, so that way we can make sure that the platform is addressing everyone's needs appropriately. But basically, the way that we see lemonGRAFT in a couple months from now, when it launches, is a place where you can go online and you can shop for all of the produce that's currently being grown in your community, right? Like, so the way I see it is like, you go into your neighbor's backyards, right? It's kind of seen almost like a private space in a way, right? But the technological revolution has really given us the opportunity to share these kinds of spaces with other people. Very similar to Airbnb, and and especially with social media, you're sharing a lot of these sort of behind the scenes moments. And so the idea is like, yeah, I can see into my neighbors' backyards now, and I can see what they're growing, and that alone is a big deal. From what we've learned from people who do grow in the community, because I've heard people tell me, oh, I had all this butternut squash, but I really needed melon, and I didn't know what to do with all my butternut squash, so I gave away as much as I could, but then I had to, a lot of it went bad. And then I realized a week later that my neighbor had an overabundance of melon, and he was looking for a butternut squash. And I was like, if only I would have known.
Yeah.
So like just that alone, just the ability for you to be able to find those people and see what's currently growing, it's a big deal. So you can shop around in your neighbors' backyards, pick all the produce you want, and it's still on the plant, so it's still like super, super fresh, right? You check out, and you pick a lemon drop, which is like the drop points, so they'll be hosted by a third party in the community. And then what lemonGRAFT does is we coordinate all of the growers, because let's say your order is made up of 15 different growers in your area, right? Mainly because these are all very, very small scale growers, right? These are people in their backyards, maybe small farms in the area. And so you go to the lemon drop. What we do is we aggregate all of those people to one area. We package it up into one box or one bag for you. So you come and you pick it up and you take it home. But the thing is that because of the way that we're coordinating this, by like when you are scheduled to go pick up your produce box in your community, the produce would have been harvested just a few hours before you get it, which is really important when you're thinking about nutrient density and about the antioxidant content of plants, because all that begins to deplete the moment you pick it, right? So this is truly the most fresh produce you could ever hope to get, besides you actually eating it directly off the plant in your backyard, right? So it's the absolute best you could get. And competitors currently, like in the markets today, it's taking at best days. I'm seeing some people, and they're touting that as like really amazing, but a huge amount of the antioxidants goes away after, for a lot of plants, goes away after 24 hours. So days is like, okay, I'm never going to get those antioxidants, but usually it's more like weeks and months. I mean, even apples, I saw a study that said that most apples in the grocery store, they can be as old as a year.
Because they refrigerate really well. It's good and bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what's the radius you envision for like the community? How big could the community be geographically?
Yeah, so I would say there's not a hard boundary to the community, because the community really belongs to you. So like it would be a radius surrounding you. So you would have a certain number of lemon drops in your area. You would only shop the ones that are close enough that make sense to you. I'm not going to shop the one 40 miles away, because that's too far away. I'm going to shop the one just a mile down the road here.
Gotcha.
And then all the growers, they choose to supply that lemon drop. And it's based on however far they're willing to travel, right? So the idea is that we are not, like, at the end of the day on lemonGRAFT, we're trying to be a little more hands off and give people a bit more freedom, because I think that the best model for this is to be as decentralized as possible. We want to try to put as much control back into the hands of the community as possible. So I want to give the growers the opportunity to say, I'm willing to drive an hour to supply that lemon drop, right? And so I don't want to restrict based on a certain mile radius. But that being said, you'll never be getting, it wouldn't make any sense that you would ever get produce from 100 miles away, because who on earth is going to drive 100 miles? And it also doesn't make sense. I mean, I don't know if we need to get into all the details, but the way that it's structured, it's not feasible for an individual to basically monopolize the community and monopolize produce and start to create big industry and then ship produce to these drop points. And the way that we have it set up, not at all, actually, it's not going to be possible.
Gotcha. And so you're, I guess it's flexible and you're going to learn as you go. I'm just trying to think of who the sort of that bullseye target for a community member might be. And I guess there'll probably be people who have more of a consumer eater profile or consumer profile, and people who are more of a grower. And so you envision the grower, for example, to be truly somebody like a mile away in their backyard, or could it be a small farm on the outskirts in the suburbs or exurbs, who, like you said, maybe 20 miles away, and view this as an add-on to what they do with the farmers market, or just who do you think that sort of prototypical grower might be?
We're receiving incredible feedback from both, actually.
Both.
And for different reasons. For the small scale gardener out of their backyard who has tried to go to market in the past, they really love this idea of lemongraft, because what they found is that going to market as a small scale grower is impossible. You're never going to make any profit. The barriers to entry are way too high. If I think about going to a farmer's market, I have to pay for a booth in advance before I've sold anything. I have to harvest an amount of produce that I don't know if I've sold. I don't know how much I'll sell, but I have to harvest, let's say, everything. I'll bring it to the market. I have to now spend my whole weekend, sitting around waiting, hoping someone's going to pick it up. And then by the time they buy, I hope I sell out. But if I don't, I bring it back and it all rots and the rest of it goes to waste. So for a small scale grower, without that coordination and without, knowing, there's so many barriers to entry. If I were to join a CSA, the CSA handles a little bit more of that coordination, but they tend to require a longer commitment. A lot of people are telling me that their CSAs require an annual commitment. And they're like, I don't want to commit for a whole year to supply produce. I happen to have, all this pineapple, and I've had people who are contractors and they're like, I have like 600 pounds of pineapple every season, and it's just here. So I would love to do something with it, but I'm not a grower, I just, if there's a way I can sell it, that'd be fantastic, but I'm not going to go out of my way, so people like that, they're finding this really an incredible thing. And also, people who typically grow for themselves, they always have an excess of specific amounts. So it'd be nice to be able to sell those, take that money and buy a broader variety of produce. So you can continue to feed yourself a larger variety, but it's almost like extending your backyard garden, right? Because in my backyard, I can only grow maybe 5 different varieties of plants. Within my community, out of those 5 different varieties, I can eat everything I want. I'll sell all the rest, buy 10 additional varieties. Now it's like as though I have 15 varieties available to me that are all grown in the same way that I would value, or the way that I would grow it in my yard. So I'm getting the same quality of produce, but I'm increasing the diversity. As far as the small scale farmer is concerned, they definitely see it as an addition to their current supply chain and distribution. So typically right now, the way that at least people we've spoken to, the way that they're distributing it is they're going to farmers markets, they're partnered with CSAs, or maybe they are even a little bit larger and they are selling to a food broker who is then redistributing it to like Whole Foods and Publix's and other grocery store chains. And honestly, one of the things that we're getting, and I'm sure that it's not necessarily the whole industry, but we have been hearing quite a few stories about the troubles that these small scale farmers are having with food brokers, mainly just because the small scale farmer has to carry all of the risk. They don't make any of the profit, and there's no guarantee that they'll actually sell it, because it's pretty much all up to the food broker whether or not they buy it. And we've been hearing, especially these past couple of years, a lot of deals just falling through, and then the growers basically losing an enormous amount of money that they had to leverage in order to make it through that next season, just because that's the way the system's set up to work. So what they need, and they've expressed it to us, they need an alternate way to sell produce in the event that they can't sell it through their traditional means, because there's really no other infrastructure for them to be able to sell their produce without them making a significant investment. And there are companies and farms that are big enough to do that, but most of them we found are not. They're like, I'm not a tech person. I'm not going to build a website. I'm not going to market myself. I'm not going to, try to, there's so much that goes into that whole distribution, like what am I gonna do? Package it myself and then like ship it? Like, so a lot of these growers are like, if you can make it easy for me, then that'd be great. But right now, the only services that are offered to them are kind of more do-it-yourself kind of thing, like that. It's not like a pre-set up Airbnb kind of setup where you just plug in and you can immediately distribute.
Interesting, yeah. And so, if I'm understanding you right, lemonGRAFT is really the software coordinator, right? I mean, you're not going to do things like, I'm just envisioning I'm a small scale farmer and I have X amount of stuff to get rid of, different things and different amount of different things. But I don't want to go to 5 different lemonGRAFT drop-off points because that's inefficient and I don't have the time for it. You're not actually going to help them with the coordination and the distribution of their stuff. You're just going to sort of identify, I guess you have to coordinate for them to figure out, this is the one place that you have to go. This is where you're going to maximize what you're able to sell. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here.
Yeah, absolutely. So they'll have all the information they need when they're deciding which lemon drops to supply as a grower. And so as a grower, I would have to make that decision for myself. Maybe early on I would supply more drop points than fewer, just so I can see which ones are doing better for me. And then over time, I'll start to pull back on some and really hone in on like these 2 different lemon drops. Or maybe there's one in particular that's farther away, but it's in the city, and that's the one where I sell all my produce. So I'll just supply that one. I'll get all my sales there, and I won't bother with these other little ones, And so I think that for different growers, they're going to have different reasons for picking their lemon drops to supply and for picking how many lemon drops they supply. But we will give them all the information that they need in order to make that informed decision.
Gotcha. Early on members here, people who seem really interested, intrigued by this on the buying side. So the eater, the person who wants to buy produce in this way. What is it that you think is the most beneficial? Like what benefit do they see in it that really stands out for them?
Sure. There are a few actually that we've identified. I'll start off with the first, which is that it is the freshest produce you could ever get, right? It's also going to be the most flavorful. I mean, we've been doing a series called LemonGRAFT Stories, where we interview people in the community and talk about their story of how they came to gardening and growing their own food and all that stuff. And as a part of it, one of the perks of meeting all these people is you get to taste their food. And I have never tasted such flavorful food. Like, you think you've eaten grapes before.
Right.
And we've even gotten to the point now where we're doing videos where we're comparing, like, hey, this is a store-bought grape. This is a grape that we just got from our friend here, and we taste the difference. And it's like, oh my goodness. Like one of our partners here, he made the comment after we did the video where we were tasting the different grapes. And he said, oh my gosh, the store-bought grape, is it just me, or does it have like a chemical aftertaste to it now? I've never noticed that before, but after eating these other grapes, like they taste so natural and so rich, like there's so much depth in the flavor. I've never noticed that before. And now when I eat these, it's like grape flavored candy. Like I'm tasting like this chemical kind of like it's weird. And we're starting to pick up on those now. And so I think one of the big ones that people are going to notice when they start eating produce that's grown in a diverse environment, in a small scale environment, like what we're going to be having from our suppliers on lemonGRAFT, is you're going to taste the difference tremendously. Like it blows my mind how big of a difference it is. It's not subtle. So that's one thing, is the flavor. Also the other thing is that with lemonGRAFT, we're coordinating growers to increase biodiversity in their community. So we're actually like modeling ecosystems, and we're going to recommend to growers which plants are the missing links in their ecosystems to build more sustainable and closed loop cycles in their environment, build more habitat, all that stuff. Like for example, someone says, I want to grow melon. We say, great, you should grow melon, but you should also grow this plant, because this is going to attract this bird who's going to eat this insect that is currently plaguing your neighbor's cucumber plant.
Mm.
If we do that with everyone, and what's going to happen is you're going to get a much richer ecosystem in your own community. That'll build the soil, and ultimately, what that'll do is increase the nutrient density of the produce.
Right.
When the nutrient density is increased, I mean, like I had some of my kale tested, and my kale was 7 times more nutrient dense than the stuff I picked up at the store.
Mm.
I mean, when you consider that 700% more nutrient, right? Like more soluble solids absorbable by my body. What does that mean for our health, right? So this idea of like maximizing what you get out of your food. I mean, if you care about health and wellness and nutrition, like this is the way to go. You're getting way more nutrition out of your plants. So another thing is, I like to talk about the model of like the Netflix versus Blockbuster model.
Okay.
Blockbuster has a limited shelf space, right? So they can only have a certain number of movies, and the same with Amazon and the bookstore, right? Like
Yeah.
the bookstore can only have a certain number of books. So what do? Well, when you have a limited amount of shelf space, what you do is you pick the most popular produce, right? Or the most popular books, the most popular movies. But what you miss is what's called the long tail or the fringes. And ultimately what happens is it's like a bell curve where, there are movies or books or produce varieties that are kind of on the fringes that some people really like, and they're passionate about it. But then you get to this bell curve where most people like all these, like strawberries and blueberries and grapes, right? Like everything you find at the typical grocery store. And then you get but then you have the other end, which is another fringe. And so what Netflix was able to do is they were able to say, well, we don't have shelf space, so we can have all of the movies. And Amazon said the same thing. We can have all of the books, right? Because we don't have shelf space. And what that did is that created an entirely new market for this long tail of people who are interested in obscure book varieties or genres, or obscure movies, or things that maybe are only watched once. And Netflix is okay with that. Amazon is okay with that if the book's only purchased once. So on LemonGRAFT, it's a similar sort of thing. We don't have shelf space. So what you're going to find on LemonGRAFT is a near infinite variety of plants, right? Like a near infinite variety of different kinds of produce. So you're going to get all the things you never could buy in the grocery store. And that may seem intimidating, but one of the ways that will help guide growers is through recipes. You can shop via recipes, and we'll aggregate all the plants in the area to make that recipe. And a lot of those plants will actually be these obscure kind of plants. And what that'll also allow us to do, that particularly ties back into the sustainability piece, where we are growing more diversity in the area. One of the ways to do that is to increase the amount of native edible species in a community. And so a lot of people don't know about what the native edible plants are in their area. But if we can create a market for that, then a lot of these plants that people otherwise see as weeds or see as useless plants because the grocery store doesn't buy them, right? And people don't know how to eat them, we can teach people how to eat them through the marketplace and create a market for that as well.
Wow, that's interesting. That's fascinating. So let me just step back to the nutrient density and wanting to eat the healthiest produce that you can find and afford. Do people play that back? Do people say they want that sort of unprovoked, uncued? Or is that something that they react to and go, yeah, if you say that you're going to deliver that, then yeah, I'm interested in it. I'm just kind of curious.
So I have never met anyone that has said they didn't want more nutritious food. And that would be provoked, right? That would be like me letting them know, like, hey, this is what we provide, and be like, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense. Of course, I would want that.
Sure.
I didn't realize that was an option. The people who say that, and there are plenty of people who say that unprovoked, and this is where I started learning about it, is from people who are starting their own gardens or starting to farm, on their own, because what they've realized is that organic and non-GMO are not good enough anymore. Right. And yeah. I stand in that same space, which is great, organic, wonderful. You're not poisoning our plants, right? And non-GMO, great, wonderful. You're not tampering with the genetics of our plants.
Right.
But at the end of the day, does that mean that we have healthy food? Neither of those promise health.
Right.
All they're saying is we promise to not poison it, and we promise to not genetically modify it. But there's no promise of health. And there's no, so like, I'm still getting, and when you look into the way that these things are farmed, the organic produce is farmed basically the same exact way as the
Yeah.
non-organic. It's
Right.
all monoculture. It's all conventionally grown.
Right.
You still have sick plants, but what we're doing is we're not spraying them. So we're losing half of the crop, which means we have to charge twice as
Of
much
course.
for the half that we get to keep. So that's all that it is, right? And I've been told this by people who like do this for a living. Um, and so when I thought about it, I was like, wow, so but you're still selling me unhealthy plants, right? Like the soil health is still depleted. It's still, and that's where the plant uptakes its nutrients and where it determines its nutrient density. So I mean, when I think about these things, it's like, well, my food is still sick, right? So at the end of the day, who is going to provide me healthy food, right? Like a healthy plant, so I can be healthy. And so the people who have come to that conclusion, which it's starting to become a whole lot, they've decided like I can't even go to the grocery store or the farmer's market anymore and buy and trust that I can just do organic non-GMO anymore, because honestly it's still sick, and we've been hearing a whole lot of that. So I would say you would find that more in the people who have decided to garden themselves,
Yeah.
because they've realized that's the only way they can get the quality and the health out of the plants that they desire.
Yeah, no, that I understand that. I understand it. And then on the third point about the diversity of things that you can find, when you go, or not when you go, but if you use this platform that lemonGRAFT seems to provide, it got me thinking about whether restaurants are factoring into this ecosystem in your mind. Certainly to get trial going, because yeah, you can offer recipes, but if somebody who knows what they're doing has used this obscure local, plant, then you can get some trial, you get some interest. Anyway, you're nodding your head, so I guess there's there's something to the restaurants.
Oh yeah, we've been reached out to by plenty of restaurants and also food manufacturers, people who make like
Really?
plant-based foods, and they're like, we want to source from lemonGRAFT to make our foods, because they understand
Cool.
the value of sourcing from a diversity of locations that are highly nutritious. But we're getting a lot of interest actually from chefs,
Yeah.
particularly chefs. Chefs, it turns out, would be much happier in
Yeah.
their work environment if they could experiment more and do less of the same, right? And the
Mm.
biggest comment we've gotten from chefs is, oh man, I wish I had more options for peppers. Like we just did a video with two chefs on YouTube. It's with Miranda and Steven. And in their lemonGRAFT story, they talked about that they garden themselves, and the reason why they do it themselves is because they want more variety to cook with.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
more about interest and about the art of like the culinary arts, right?
Mm.
And so they so restaurants and chefs in particular are fascinated with this idea of being able to source like all sorts of different varieties, because then it's like it reinvigorates what it means to be a chef, like an expert of food, and to be a kind of a pioneer of these new native
Mm.
edible plant species, right? And that's really what we're providing for these people, is we're saying, here's now a new frontier, right?
Mm.
For you to explore. Now go and explore and create something beautiful out of it. And they're really excited about that, because they've been there, done that with all the stuff you can buy at the traditional store.
Interesting. Wow, that's fascinating, and I can see how that would work. Um, the other thing that occurs to me is, is that one of the barriers that people throw up around um, eating eating more produce, eating veggies and fruits, is the cost, the affordability. Now, that's not something that you're tackling head on, but how are you thinking about affordability within the system? And are people deciding on prices between them, or how's that going to work?
Well, first I'll say that affordability of produce has nothing to do with whether or not it's local, because
Sure.
the produce that currently being supplied by the traditional supply chain has been inflating. Like I think the USDA put out a study that showed that the produce has inflated in the last 30 years. It's inflated 40%, and that is on top of standard inflation. Like that's with standard inflation adjusted for, it's an additional 40% inflated. So it's inflating pretty fast, and it's actually fresh fruits and vegetables are inflating faster than all other food categories combined. And so what we're seeing is that even with our our traditional food system that is supposed to make produce much more affordable and easier to purchase, it is becoming unavailable to people who maybe can't afford to spend. I think I went to the grocery store the other day, and it was it was like $5 for a single avocado.
Wow.
And I was like, I
I've never
can't.
seen that, but yeah.
I I was working as an architect at the time, right? Like I'm like, I should be able to afford an avocado. And I'm looking at this produce. I'm like, I can't afford to buy fresh produce. You know, like that, we're gonna have to put that avocado back. So I mean, when we're talking about affordability of produce, that is already becoming unaffordable. And ever since COVID now, especially with meat and dairy and produce, these things in particular are becoming just astronomically expensive and not really something that is easy to purchase. What is becoming, actually what has deflated under our current food system is oils, salts, sugars, and soft drinks. So all of the components that make up processed foods, those have actually deflated in price over the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So they are way more available. And so just to give you an idea, like when you have an industry that is very efficient, what that means is that it's able to pump out a lot of something, but what the thing that you're getting ends up becoming way more refined, way more processed. And what we're seeing is that it is benefiting the processed foods industry a whole lot because that's what the system is set up to produce.
Absolutely.
But what it is not able to benefit is the whole foods, fresh produce industry, because that requires a much more dynamic system, a much more nonlinear system, a much more decentralized system in order to produce healthy, great food there. So what we're seeing is that kind of stuff is increasing in price under this system, and the stuff that we don't really want, I mean, people are buying it, but stuff that won't really benefit your health, that's becoming very efficient and very inexpensive. That being said, it's hard for me to predict what the prices will be on lemonGRAFT because all the prices will be set by the people in your community.
Yeah.
What I do know is that prices will fluctuate from community to community because the cost of living and there's all sorts of factors that are going to factor into it. But so I can't speak to what the prices will be on lemonGRAFT. I'm not sure. I anticipate that the prices will be significantly lower than the grocery stores, and the reason is because the overhead, we've removed so much of the overhead that there's not as big of an expense anymore to bring that produce to market. So I anticipate that it'll be lower. But one thing in particular well, I'll end it there. Yeah, I anticipate that it'll be lower.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that, and the expectation of the buyer might be that it is a bit lower. And on the other side, with the suppliers, some of them are going to be in a situation where they want to get rid of things, and so they may be a little bit more flexible in what they want to accept as a price. So I think you're right. There'll be pressure both ways, but it'll be interesting to see how it nets out.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll make one more comment on that, which is that right now, for a lot of these growers, they're not selling anything; they're just giving it away right now, and they're perfectly okay with that. And if they had a way to just give the excess away, they would do it.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is we're saying, no, don't just give it away. I mean, it would be great to give it away, but like
monetize a little
create
bit.
a market, monetize a little bit so you can take that money and you can buy from your neighbors and so it encourages them to grow, because the goal isn't, I think if you give it away, that's a great thing. I think that builds community. But I think by creating a market around it, what we'll do is we will encourage more entrepreneurial spirit in the community to start growing more. And by increasing the grower user base, that will overall benefit the community significantly with the environment, but also with the public health.
Public health, yeah, fantastic. Wow. This is really fascinating stuff. It really is, Zach. I mean, you're thinking through all these things that are going to be beneficial, in more than one way. I mean, it's fantastic. So let me just end with the sort of next steps. Are you thinking about a particular geography where you're going to sort of launch this, or how are you thinking about it? Or can you share that?
Yeah, actually, I can share a little bit about that. Basically, we're not sure exactly where we are going to launch our first community yet. And the reason is because right now we still have a bunch of people signing up for we're calling it the Founders Club.
Yeah.
Basically, we're asking everyone who's interested to subscribe on the Founders Club. It's free. There are paid tiers if you want like a ton more information and whatnot. If you want to be a part of like community building workshops, and we'll help you prepare for LemonGRAFT's launch in advance. But there's a free tier. So just if you subscribe, what that does is it tells us who is interested and where are they, right? Like where are they in the world?
Yeah.
And if we're seeing that our community is exploding over in Austin or in Dallas, I think you're in Dallas, right?
I'm in Dallas, yeah.
Yeah. So if it starts exploding over in Dallas, then that's going to signal to us, okay, I think, we think that the first community, we should shift our gears over to Dallas and launch it there first.
Right.
So we haven't decided yet. We're waiting till the last minute to really decide where the community will be launched. But to all your listeners, if you can signal to us, follow us on Instagram, subscribe, and talk to us. Let us know. Say, hey, come here. Because we're still trying to decide. We got some people all over, up in Canada that are telling us to come up there.
Oh, really?
People in Northern and Southern California, actually, up in Chicago, out in Arizona and New Mexico. They have communities out there that are like, we should do it here. So,
wow.
So we're just trying to see which one's going to be the largest, so that way it has the most potential for success, and the most potential for us to diagnose any symptoms or any bugs that need to get fixed before we release it nationally.
Yeah. Understand. And you might even want to grow it in a stepwise fashion, but that's really fascinating. I really think you're onto something, Zach. I really do. So I anticipate that I'll want to follow up with you, maybe a few months or however long, a few months after your launch, to kind of see how things are ramping up. But I really think you're onto something. Well, thanks so much for the time, and I appreciate the fact that we worked through the technical issues in the beginning, but it was really beneficial to me. A lot of stuff for me to sort of think through and build a story around.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. It's always great. We actually, one of our favorite things to do is interviews and podcasts, and so appreciate you reaching out. We really enjoy it. So I enjoyed it at least.
Good. I'm glad you did. I did too.
Awesome.
All right, we'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
Yeah.